beyond the corridors of the Kremlin, deep in the frozen east, in a region so vast it covers 11 time zones, holds empire with its resources. That region has had enough. I'm watching this unfold in real time, and what is happening in Siberia right now is one of the most underreported geopolitical stories of our era. Fracture isn't happening in the trenches. It's happening 5,000 kilometers to the east, in a place that has been quietly building toward this moment for over a century. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exact terrified and why the Siberian question may end up being the defining crack in the Russian Empire's foundation. If you haven't subscribed to Daily Brief yet, do it right now. Because what's unfolding in Siberia will be here when it does. Let's go back to the beginning, not a few months ago, not even a few decades ago. Let's go back to the moment Siberia's resentment was first born, because understanding that Russia colonized Siberia the same way every empire colonizes its periphery, with force, with erasure, with a deliberate, systematic campaign to destroy what was already there, and the peoples of Siberia, Yakuts, Buryats, Tuvans, dozens of distinct cultures were subjected to what historians have called Russification, their languages suppressed, their religion of Orthodox Christianity and imperial ambition. And then, once the culture was taken, they took the resources too. Siberia holds just under 80% of Russia's oil reserves, 80% of its coal, similar proportions of its precious metals and diamonds, more than 40% of the nation's entire timber supply. Research by economist Peter Weston has shown that outside the Urals, the major contributors to Russia's per capita gross regional product are almost entirely the natural resource regions, Siberia and the Russian Far East. Let that sink in. Exploited region is the engine of the entire Russian economy. And what does Moscow send back? Almost nothing. In 2012, the Tomsk region alone delivered 130 billion. It received back a mere 10.3 billion. The other 92 billion, it disappeared into the common pot. No explanation, no accountability, no apology. And it was never really about separatism. At first, it was about dignity. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Siberia saw its chance not necessarily to leave, but to finally fierce comeback. Activists wanted an autonomous state, yes, but more than that, they wanted economic self-management and cultural preservation. They filed petitions. They wrote letters. In 1997, they put a formal proposal before the Russian government requesting a regional component be incorporated into the tax on mineral extraction. Moscow ignored it. Then came the movement, the Kemerovo regionalist movement, all of them saying the same thing, all of them getting the same silence in return, so the people took to the streets. In 2012, in Novosibirsk, Moscow, that phrase, in those three words, became the rallying cry of a generation. Rally organizer Rostislav Antinov told reporters at a press conference that Siberia is the main source of its own people. Putin's response? Not a negotiation, not a reform. He signed legislation criminalizing calls for separatism. And then, 7 months later, he expenses. That's not governance. That's occupation. But here's the part nobody talks about. When you suppress a movement by criminalizing it, you don't kill it, you radicalize it. 2013's scandalous exhibition, The United States of Siberia, held at Moscow's Center for Contemporary Art, a full gallery of Siberian artists presenting a hypothetical independent state, snow and taiga. The flag caused a national scandal. It was symbolic, yes, but symbols are how revolutions start. Reçu numéro 1, annonce numéro 2. The Siberian curse. Bradshaw coined a term for what is happening in Siberia. He called it the Siberian dilemma. Others have simply called it the resource curse. The mechanism is brutal in its simplicity. Russia needs Siberia's energy to extract those resources at scale. Moscow must pour investment into extraction infrastructure. But almost none of that investment stays in Siberia. It flows back west, the region that generates the wealth that is simultaneously overdeveloped and misdeveloped. Giant industrial extraction sites sitting next to crumbling roads, underfunded hospitals, failing schools. Up to 2025, a national document does not mention Siberia as a priority region even once. Economists call this the Siberian curse. And then there was the self-serving Moscow's relationship with Siberia really was. Yukos was founded in 1993 and became Russia's largest oil producer, anchored in Siberian extraction. Owner Mikhail Khodorkovsky began to challenge Putin politically. Putin had him arrested in 2003 on charges of tax evasion and embezzlement. The company was driven into bankruptcy by lost their jobs overnight. A $50 billion arbitration award destabilized the regional economy. The state-owned giant Rosneft swept in to take over, and the corruption simply continued. Relationship with Siberia looks like in practice. You don't own the mine, you are the mine. A 2020 survey by the Levada Center found that 44% of Siberians feel their region, Siberia, should have greater autonomy, and 21% identify as Siberian rather than Russian. Those numbers are not small. Those numbers are the beginning of a nation. Resu numero 2. What is happening right now in 2024 and 2025? I need you to do one thing. Hit like on this video. It takes 2 seconds and it tells us at Daily Brief that this is what you want more of. We cover the stories that the mainstream misses. If that matters to you, like and subscribe right now. Because Annonce numero 2 is where this story goes from historical to urgent. Just weakened Moscow militarily. It lit the fuse. The Ukraine war changed everything for Siberia. Not metaphorically, literally. The casualty rates from Siberian and Far Eastern regions have been capped in St. Petersburg. According to reporting by Euromaidan Press, soldiers from Yakutia have suffered roughly 40 times more casualties per capita than soldiers from the Moscow district. 40 times. Villages, communities that sent their fathers and brothers to a war they didn't start, for an empire they don't feel part of, and watched them come back in body bags, or not come back at all. One woman's husband went to Ukraine to make money because the poverty in her region left them with no options. He didn't come back. Another woman described her son returning from the front only to receive a fraction of the promised $100,000 he'd been told, and then being threatened with redeployment on top of it. Siberia was already exhausted. The war made it furious, and that fury is now crossed into action. The Siberia was formally established in 2023, operating under the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. It is composed of Russian citizens, ethnic Russians, Yakuts, who took up arms against their own government. The commander is Vladislav Amosov, an ethnic Yakut who claims to have spent 15 years in Russia's own GRU military intelligence. He supports independence for Israel. The battalion's coordinator, Denis Sokolov, explained the unit's philosophy in stark terms. We understand that all of Moscow's wealth comes from Siberia, and that Moscow lives off of Siberian is important, because without them, the empire will be less aggressive. One fighter, a 29-year-old Yakut from the Siberian city of Irkutsk using the call sign Vargan, said to Bloomberg News, "I want a very rich country, but the people are so poor. Only government officials who serve Putin are prospering. Stop." Reread that quote. A Russian citizen from Siberia has traveled not per se, but for the future of his own homeland. In March 2024, the Siberian battalion participated in a cross-border raid into Russia's Kursk and Belgorod regions alongside the Freedom of Russia. It had redeployed to the Volchansk sector by winter 2024-2025. According to reporting by Gray Dynamics, it had returned to active combat on key front lines. And on December historical terms, the Russian Federal Security Service expanded its official list of terrorist and extremist organizations by adding 172 new separatist organizations, 100 and fringe movement. That's a government desperately trying to hold back a tide. Resu numero 2. Let's talk about what is really happening inside Moscow right now, because behind the propaganda, he has always understood one thing: control the narrative and you control the country. For years, the Kremlin's answer to Siberian discontent was the same playbook every authoritarian uses. Dismiss it as make an example of anyone who speaks loudly. When the shaman Alexander rose to prominence in 2018 as a symbol of spiritual resistance, boldly calling Putin a demon, attracting something almost mythic, the Kremlin sent 9 police cars and over 50 officers to arrest him at his family compound on the outskirts of Yakutsk. He was subjected to involuntary deterioration. His followers were enraged. That move didn't silence the movement. It baptized it. But here's what Putin still hasn't understood, what he fundamentally in question. You cannot occupy a place forever that knows it is funding your occupation. The math becomes visible eventually. China entering the picture has made it worse. Russians have opened Siberia to Chinese investment in oil, gas, and coal. Chinese companies have acquired stakes in Siberian energy production. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been woven through Siberia's habit with horror, not just because they're being exploited by Moscow, but because Moscow is now actively inviting a foreign power in to exploit them further. It's one thing to have your government hand you over to someone else's interests entirely. As reported by Euromaidan Press in October 2025, in the Sakha Republic, Yakutia, Siberian separatist sentiment has evolved drive as a movement of identity, survival, and open defiance. In September 2025, local deputy Alexander Ivanov publicly discussed Yakutia's need to sending regional official, openly advocating for independence. That is not a fringe. That is a fracture. And what does this mean for you? Whether you're watching from North America, Europe, or anywhere else political stability affects your daily life, this matters directly. Siberia holds a resource base of extraordinary global significance. If the Russian state fractures, the question of who controls those resources becomes one of the most consequential geopolitical questions of the century. Not because war is inevitable, but because the pipeline routes, the gas renegotiated. Everything that Europe has spent years trying to untangle from Russian supply would face a second round of reconfiguration under entirely different actors. And for China, already an independent or autonomous Siberia would represent one of the greatest strategic prizes of the modern era. A direct supply chain for oil, gas, coal, and timber without having to negotiate through Moscow, Washington. And as reported by the Washington Post's David Ignatius, that prospect, Russia fracturing while China fills the vacuum, is exactly what keeps American foreign policy planners awake at night. Territories of the Russian Federation may, in time, declare independence, much as they did during the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The obvious global benefit would be a reduced Russian capacity, but the instability of transition, a broken Russian state with nuclear weapons, energy infrastructure in flux, and China positioned to absorb the economic gains, is a scenario with no clean out, because that's honestly where we are. Path 1. Russia's war in Ukraine ends in some form of negotiated exhaustion. Moscow, weakened and isolated, is forced to make regions gain meaningful autonomy, not independence, but real fiscal control over their own resources, real representation in the national government. A reversal of the 92 billion ruble movement becomes a regionalist reform movement. It stabilizes. Russia contracts but survives in a federalized form. Path 2. The war ends with Putin weakened but still in power, sinks. Moscow doubles down on control. The crackdowns intensify. The 172 organizations on the FSB terrorist list become 500. And then something breaks. Not all, and then all at once, the way empires always fall. Siberian representatives refuse to send tax revenue. Yakutia holds an independence referendum that the international community, backed by China, makes its move economically. And Moscow, bled dry by war and sanctions, cannot respond with force fast enough to stop what has already started. I think path 2 is more not as pessimism, but as a reading of the momentum. The FSB's own actions, adding 172 organizations to their extremist list in a single sweep, tells you that they are not made. What do you think? Does Siberia become the fracture that finally breaks the Russian Empire, or does Putin find a way to contain it the way he has contained everything else? Drop your answer in the comments below. If this video gave you a perspective you haven't seen elsewhere, please share it. The story of Siberia is one of the great untold geopolitical dramas of our time. At Daily Brief, we believe that under the official version. Subscribe if you haven't.